Headlights idled red above a winter-black river, a line of cars packed tight on the narrow span between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio. It was just before 5 on Friday, December 15th, 1967. Heaters were on, holiday packages stacked on back seats, radios low. A sharp, metallic crack cut through the noise. The deck bounced under tires. A second report followed, steel answering steel, and the roadway lurched. Joints tore, chains snapped. A section of deck dropped away, and then another, and then the center span. Drivers saw taillights pitch downward and vanish. In less than a minute, the Silver Bridge disappeared into the Ohio River. The Silver Bridge had been part of daily life since 1928. Painted aluminum silver and stretching 1,760 feet, it carried U.S. Route 35 across a vital corridor. Its towers rose on either bank, and its main span hung from chains of paired eyebars, thick steel bars with holes at each end, pinned together at the joints. The arrangement saved weight and worked as long as every piece held. For decades, traffic flowed without incident. The deck was about 22 feet wide, 2 tight lanes with no shoulders. Inspection then relied on what an eye could see, while the most critical joints were sealed by pins and plates that hid defects. By the mid-1960s, the span carried tractor-trailers far heavier than anything in 1928. Its paired eyebars shared load 2 at a time, a choice that saved steel but left little margin if one link cracked. That Friday, the span was crowded even for the Christmas season. By late afternoon, the roadway was stacked with cars and trucks bumper to bumper. Witnesses later described the first sound as a gunshot. Others remembered feeling the deck jump under them before everything fell away. In the collapse, 31 vehicles went into the water or onto the riverbank rubble. 46 people died. 9 more were injured and survived, some pulled from the current by rescuers and bystanders with boats and ropes. The first minutes were chaos. Sirens converged from both states as patrol cars, fire engines, and ambulances forced their way through gridlocked streets to the riverfront. Searchlights raked the water. It was cold enough that breath hung in the beam. Twisted steel stuck up out of the current. Tires, seat cushions, and broken guardrail drifted downstream. On the West Virginia shore, families stood in shock, trying to count who should have been on the bridge at 5 o'clock. On the Ohio side, emergency crews launched boats and tried to mark where the roadway had struck the surface and gone under. The river ran dark and fast. The light went out quickly below. By nightfall, the rescue had become recovery. Divers worked in near-freezing water, guiding slings under cars that lay piled on the riverbed. Cranes on barges lifted vehicles into the air dripping with silt and ice. Troopers recorded license plates and matched them to missing persons lists. Churches opened their doors. The Red Cross set up cots. Across town, families waited for a knock and a name. Investigators began almost immediately. The National Transportation Safety Board and the Army Corps of Engineers collected and numbered every piece they could raise. What looked like a tangle of broken metal was sorted into labeled fragments and reassembled into a map of failure. The pattern pointed to one spot on the north eyebar chain, joint C, 13N. There, an eyebar identified in records as bar 330 had fractured through its inner head. The brake face showed a small, older crack, about 1/10 of an inch deep, that had formed years earlier. Under repeated stress and corrosion, that crack had grown until the bar split. Design left no forgiveness. Each chain was built with only 2 bars sharing the tension. When bar 330 failed, the pin shifted the force onto the companion bar. That bar broke almost at once. The chain parted, and with it, the main suspension on that side. Loads surged elsewhere in patterns the bridge was never meant to sustain. The collapse progressed in seconds. Without redundancy, one fracture became a total failure. Those findings reshaped how the country thought about bridges. At the time, Many older spans were judged safe because they had stood for decades. The Silver Bridge showed how a small defect, invisible to routine checks, could grow silently until a structure failed without warning. In 1968, Congress passed new federal requirements for systematic bridge inspection and funded programs to find and fix fracture-critical details. States built inventories, set intervals for inspection, trained specialists to locate cracks and corrosion, and prioritized repairs. The language of laboratories and field notes turned into policy. Non-destructive testing, ultrasonic measurements, fatigue life, redundancy. For Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, the disaster was personal before it was policy. Neighbors recognized cars being lifted from the water. Church bells tolled for multiple funerals in a single week. Main Street merchants watched business vanish because the crossing was gone. A ferry was pressed back into service as a stopgap. School schedules were rewritten for students who now had long detours. The empty gap across the river was a daily reminder. You could leave for work and not come home because a piece of steel had finally let go. Engineers and local officials had practical problems to solve while the investigation moved forward. How to route traffic without the crossing, how to keep the river channel open while cranes and barges worked the wreckage, how to clear the site safely without destroying evidence. Divers and riggers became expert at lifting vehicles that had been stacked on the riverbed. Reports were compiled, photographs taken, and samples cut for labs. The pieces were not just metal. They were the last records of decisions made in 1928 and the stresses applied in 1967. The replacement came 2 years later. The Silver Memorial Bridge opened in December 1969, about a mile downstream. Its design was different: multiple main girders, modern steels, and redundancy so that no single crack would be decisive. The new crossing restored the link between the towns, but it did not replace what had been lost. In Point Pleasant's riverfront park, a plaque lists the names of the 46 who died. Each December, people gathered to read them and to remember the sound that started it all, the snap of metal, followed by the silence of the river closing over the lights. The Silver Bridge collapse sits in national memory, not only because it killed so many, but because of what it changed. After 1967, terms like fracture critical, pin and hanger, and eyebar inspection moved from engineering journals into budgets and law. Inspectors were trained to find the kind of tiny flaws that had once escaped notice. Load ratings were recalculated. Detours were drawn for overweight trucks. The logic was straightforward. The cost of finding a small problem is nothing compared to the cost when a structure fails under traffic. When people retell the story in Point Pleasant, they still start with the evening itself. Christmas shoppers, a winter river, and a bridge that had always been there until it wasn't. They end with a legacy: a nationwide inspection program that has found and repaired defects across the United States. Lives saved by those changes will never be counted, because the warning comes in time. The first signal in 1967 was a single crack in a single piece of steel. The answer, learned the hard way, was to never let one part decide the fate of a whole bridge again. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.